Hey, my beautiful viewers. Tonight we begin with the remarkable lives and incredible resilience of medieval peasants, the everyday heroes who, despite the odds, managed to survive some of the coldest and most brutal nights in history. Their story is one of a kind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you experience isn't the warmth of a mother's arms or the soft murmur of a lullaby. It's cold, bitter, biting cold that creeps through the cracked timber walls of a one-room hut and clutches at your fragile, newborn body. You're born in the dead of winter, sometime in the early 1300s, in a forgotten village carved out of England's endless forests. No one here knows what year it is. Why would they? Dates are the business of monks and kings, not peasants. Your first breath draws in the smell of damp straw, burnt wood, stale sweat, and something sour, like curdled milk left too long by the hearth. The midwife, an old woman with hands like tree bark and a spine bent from decades of back-breaking labor, grunts approvingly when you wail into the smoky air. She wraps you in a scrap of linen that's seen more births and deaths than anyone cares to count. Your parents glance at you, more with calculation than tenderness. You're the fourth child. Another set of tiny hands to help in the field someday. Another mouth to feed, almost immediately. No cheering, no bells, no proud declarations of your name. Just the low hum of the fire, the shifting of your mother's weary body, and outside, the steady drip of melting frost from the thatched roof. Life begins, not with a bang, but with a shiver and a cough. The hut you're born into is barely large enough for the 6 people already living there. The walls are wattle and daub, patched haphazardly with mud and dung. The roof leaks in the rain. Rats skitter in the corners at night. A single fire pit in the center provides smoke for cooking, warmth for survival, and soot for lungs already battered by damp winters. Privacy is a luxury reserved for dreams. Your parents sleep on a rough straw mattress, your older siblings huddled beside them like puppies for warmth. In a few years you'll be there too, if you survive that long. If the coughing sickness or a bad winter doesn't take you first, your father is a villain, a serf bound to the land by obligation and debt, owning neither his fields nor his life. Your mother's hands are calloused from years of churning butter, mending clothes, and hauling buckets of water heavier than any small child. Neither of them can read. Neither will ever travel more than a few miles from this spot. They measure life in harvests, in feast days, in deaths. From the moment you're born, you inherit their station. No matter how clever you might become, how strong or cunning, you will always belong to someone else. Your Lord owns your time, your labor, even your body, when it comes right down to it. Escape isn't a dream. It's not even a thought. It's like wondering if you can fly. You simply don't question the sky. Outside, the village is little more than a handful of huts, clustered around a worn dirt track. There's a crumbling church, its stones slick with moss and age, where the priest preaches in Latin. None of you understand. There's a communal oven for baking what little bread the village can spare. And there's the manor house, looming like a mountain over your world, its banners snapping in the cold wind. A place you might glimpse once or twice a year, when your family goes to pay their dues in wheat, chickens, or bloodied coins. Seasons dictate your life even before you can walk. Spring is muddy and full of back-breaking work. Summer brings a moment of frantic hope, praying the harvest will be good enough to last the year. Autumn is for gathering, sweating, and storing. Winter is for suffering and praying you have enough to make it through. There's no real calendar in your world, only the iron rhythm of feast days and holy days, Christmas, Easter, All Saints' Day, markers not of celebration, but of survival. The priest rings the bell, and you trudge to Mass. You kneel on cold stone floors, your tiny knees aching, listening to sermons about sin and salvation you can't understand. All you know is that hell is hot, heaven is cold and distant, and your life is a test you're almost certain to fail. Illness lurks everywhere, in the river where you fetch water, in the filthy straw where you sleep, in the very breath of the people crammed around you. Sickness takes the weak first, the newborns who don't cry loudly enough, the old who fall and never stand again, the mothers worn out by too many winters and too many births. You survive your first winter through sheer stubbornness, or maybe through the prayers your mother mumbles when she thinks no one is listening. When the snows melt and the first pale shoots of green rise from the frozen earth, you're still here, a squirming bundle of hunger and noise. Nobody records your name. Nobody outside your village even knows you exist. But here you are anyway, alive, scraping, clinging, beginning your long march through a world that neither notices nor cares whether you succeed or fail. Welcome to your life, peasant. No banners will fly for you, no songs will be sung, but the world will grind on, and you will grind with it. Before you can even speak in full sentences, the village teaches you two things: work and obedience. There's no such thing as a lazy child here. By the time you wobble around on uncertain feet, you're expected to carry small loads of firewood, shoo geese from gardens, and mimic the motions of sowing seeds. Play is not a word you know. There are no toys, no games designed for fun alone. Everything has a purpose, even your childish diversions. If you stack stones, it's practice for carrying heavier loads. If you chase the chickens, it's to keep them from trampling the precious kitchen herbs. Your world stretches about as far as your legs can carry you in an afternoon. The forest that begins just beyond the last cottage seems endless and mysterious, a place of hidden dangers and whispered tales. Wolves, spirits, and outlaws are said to lurk beneath its tangled canopy. You're warned never to venture there alone, lest you vanish like old Gervais's boy, who wandered off 2 winters ago and never returned. The other children of the village, your brothers, cousins, and ragged friends, are your tribe. Together you form a kind of half-wild pack, roaming between the fields and the mud tracks, learning the skills you'll need to survive. You don't know letters or numbers. You know the weight of an axe handle in your hand, the rhythm of sowing seeds in rocky soil, the proper way to stack hay so it doesn't rot before winter. Accidents are frequent and rarely forgiven by nature. A wrong step near the mill pond could mean drowning. A tumble from the barn loft could snap your leg, and there are no doctors here, only the old woman with her sour-smelling poultices and whispered prayers. A broken limb might heal, or it might cripple you for life. Either way, work will go on. Meals are sparse and monotonous. Breakfast might be a crust of yesterday's bread, harder than stone and dipped into thin, watery ale. Fresh water is a dangerous luxury. Most drink ale that's weak but at least boiled and relatively safe. Dinner, if you're lucky, is a thick pottage, a gruel of barley, beans, onions, and whatever else was left unspoiled from the last market day. Meat? Forget it. You might see it once or twice a year when the Lord's hunts leave scraps for the villagers, or during rare festival days when a pig is slaughtered. More often, the only meat you taste is in the form of salted fish, so tough and leathery it makes your jaw ache. You're not hungry because you're lazy. You're hungry because the earth is stingy and the weather cruel. A late frost, a flood, a poor harvest. Any of these can tip your village into famine. And famine is not just empty bellies. It's watching the oldest villagers grow thinner and weaker each day. It's hearing babies cry through the night because their mothers can no longer produce enough milk. It's seeing fields scoured down to bare mud while your stomach twists and cramps. No one talks about the bad years. The memories are too raw. Instead, you pray. Every feast day, every Sunday, every moment the church bells ring. You pray to the Virgin for mercy, to Christ for deliverance, to a host of half-forgotten saints for just one more season of enough rain, enough sun, enough grain to see you through the long, bitter winter. You don't understand the Latin words murmured from the pulpit. You only know that kneeling until your knees bruise and keeping your head bowed is part of survival. God is not distant or theoretical here. He is immediate. He is both protector and punisher. The villagers speak of him the way others speak of the weather, capricious, unpredictable, terrifying. Life is a negotiation with nature, with the Lord, with God himself. You learn early that complaining gets you nowhere. Crying gets you ignored. Working, bowing your head, enduring, these are your only shields against a world that offers little kindness. Your body is small but wiry, tough, hardened by cold mornings and brutal afternoons spent tending goats, hauling firewood, picking stones from the fields. Every muscle strains toward adulthood, because the sooner you grow strong, the sooner you can contribute your full share. And still, lurking behind every ordinary day, is the specter of death. A cough could become a fever. A cut could become an infection. A bad fall could lead to gangrene. There is no safety net here, no kindly healer with potions, no miracle cure waiting in the wings. Only the old woman with her willow bark teas and foul-smelling salves, muttering in a voice roughened by too many funerals. You don't think much about the future, because the future is uncertain. You live in the endless, grinding present. Spring brings mud and planting. Summer brings heat and bugs thick enough to blacken the sky. Autumn is a mad scramble to gather everything that grew. Winter is suffering, silence, cold, repeat, endure, hope, and above all, survive. You're about 7 years old when your life shifts in a way that feels almost invisible, but cuts deeper than any knife. You are no longer seen as a child. In the village eyes, you are now small labor. Nobody calls it a coming of age. There's no ceremony, no special meal. One day you are chasing hens in the muddy lane, and the next you are handed a crude wooden rake and expected to stand in the fields from dawn until dusk. Your muscles ache, your fingers bleed, your skin burns and cracks under the sun. No one cares. Pain is not an excuse. Hunger is not an excuse. Childhood itself is not an excuse. The tasks seem endless and impossible. You drag heavy sacks of seed behind your father as he plods through freshly plowed furrows. You stoop low to rip weeds from between delicate young crops. You climb to precarious heights to thatch roofs, risking a fall that could kill you or leave you limping for life. You are a cog in the great creaking machine of survival, and machines do not rest because they are tired. In summer, the work is brutal. Under the relentless sun, sweat stings your eyes. Blisters rise and pop, leaving raw skin that burns every time you touch the rough handles of your tools. You learn to work through it, because stopping means a cuff on the ear or worse, the silent, shaming scorn of your neighbors, who are all enduring the same pain. In winter, work changes, but never ends. You chop firewood until your fingers are so numb you can hardly hold the axe. You help dig ditches for drainage, often breaking through frozen earth with nothing but crude iron tools. The cold gnaws at your bones, leaving you shaking so hard you can barely keep upright. Still, you work. What else is there? Schooling is a fantasy. A handful of boys, sons of wealthier peasants, or minor officials might learn a few letters from the parish priest. You, like almost everyone you know, will live and die without ever reading a single word. The written world is for monks, scribes, and nobles. You are anchored to the earth, and the earth does not write. But you do learn. You learn the ancient, brutal wisdom of the fields. You learn that wheat planted too late will rot under the frost. You learn to watch the clouds and smell the rain before it comes. You learn the art of twisting rope from hemp, the best way to stack firewood so it dries faster, the quick flick of the wrist needed to snap a rabbit's neck cleanly if you ever catch one in a snare. You learn to endure, not to question. Around you, the rhythms of life thrum in their endless cycle. Marriages, birth, death, crops planted, harvested, milled, lords arriving to collect taxes, priests arriving to collect sins. You notice the toll that time takes on everyone. A boy who once raced you across the common green now limps permanently from a poorly mended injury. A girl you once splashed with mud now carries a baby at her hip, her face hollowed with hunger and exhaustion. The seasons carve their stories into your skin. Sunburns that peel away in sheets. Calluses so thick you can drive thorns into your hands without bleeding. Scars from careless slips of the scythe. And you grow tougher, if not taller. By the time you are 10, your days are no easier, but they are no longer new. Pain is ordinary. Fatigue is constant. Every morning is a test, and every night is a small, grim victory. You lived through another day. Festivals provide tiny islands of brightness in a gray sea. May Day brings a wild celebration with dancing and green garlands, though the feast is meager. Midsummer's Eve is a rare night of bonfires, music, and whispered promises made in the shadows. Harvest festivals are sacred, marking the brief period when the granaries are full and the danger of hunger retreats for a while. On those days, the village breathes easier. Illy flows, songs rise, and for a few precious hours, you almost forget the hard march of the seasons. Almost. Because even in the middle of laughter, you can see the priest standing at the edge of the crowd, stern and watchful, reminding everyone that joy is fleeting and sin never sleeps. The church bells toll every Sunday without fail, summoning the village to confession, to penance, to prayer. You kneel until your knees throb, your head bowed not from reverence, but exhaustion. The priest speaks of heaven and hell, but to you, heaven seems distant, and hell feels very close. Hunger, disease, loss. You've seen them all firsthand. You pray, because that's what you were taught to do. You pray for your father's aching joints, for your mother's hacking cough, for the wheat to grow and the rains to fall, and the wolves to stay away from the flock. You pray without really knowing if anyone listens, because what else is there? No kings will ride to save you. No miracles will lift you from this earth. Your hope is in your own two hands, your family's endurance, and the faint, desperate wish that this year won't be as bad as the last. You don't dream of riches or castles. You dream of a harvest so good that your belly will feel full for more than a single day. You dream of a winter where no new graves are dug. You dream, against all odds, of simply surviving. As you grow into your teenage years, you realize something else that weighs even heavier than the endless work. You are not free. You probably never thought much about it before. Freedom is an idea so far removed from your daily life that it might as well be another world entirely, like the heaven the priest speaks of. But as you gain strength, as your arms thicken from swinging sickles and your back knots from hauling bundles, you start noticing the invisible chains that bind you. You belong to the land, not in some poetic, spiritual sense. Literally, you are a villain, a serf, tied to your lord's manor, just as surely as the oxen are tied to their plow. If you try to leave, if you abandon your village in search of better fields or kinder masters, you are a criminal, a fugitive. You can be tracked, caught, beaten, and dragged back to toil under the same sun, on the same soil, under the same indifferent Lord. Your life is not your own, and it never was. The fields you break your back for are not yours. They are the Lord's. Half of what you grow is taken as rent. Half of the livestock you raise, the eggs your chickens lay, the apples you pluck from the few battered trees, all of it can be claimed by your Lord at his whim. The best parts are sent to the manor. The scraps are left for you and your neighbors to squabble over. There's also the corvée, mandatory labor days, where you and the other peasants are summoned to build roads, repair bridges, or work the Lord's private lands. No pay, no choice, just more hours spent sweating and blistering under the sun, while your own patch of crops withers for lack of tending. The taxes are endless: grain tax, hearth tax, marriage tax if you ever hope to wed. Even death doesn't free you. Your family must pay a death duty when you're gone, handing over your best ox or cow or whatever pitiful possession you owned. The injustice burns in your chest, but you swallow it down. Anger is a dangerous indulgence for people like you. A careless word spoken in the wrong ear could see you flogged in the village square, or worse, clapped in the stocks, where you'd sit baking in the sun while children throw mud and rocks at your face. And still, amid the hardship, there is pride. You take pride in your calloused hands, in the straight furrows you plow, in the chickens fattened under your care, in the sacks of barley that somehow, despite the endless obstacles, you manage to bring to market. You take pride in the thatched roof you helped patch before the first winter snow. You take pride in the rough-spun tunic your mother sewed by hand, patching holes again and again until the cloth is more mended than original. These things may be small to a lord riding past in a velvet cloak, but they are mountains to you. This is your life, and you will not let it break you. Not yet. Marriage looms on the horizon now. If you're a boy, your father and the village reeve are already eyeing possible matches for you. They aren't choosing based on love or even friendship. Marriage is an economic decision, combining a couple of small plots into a slightly bigger one, forging alliances between families so that labor can be shared more efficiently. If you're a girl, your life is already being negotiated like a piece of livestock. Your worth is calculated in dowry, chickens, a goat. If you're lucky, maybe a patch of barley. Your age doesn't matter so much as your fertility. The village midwife has already sized you up with a knowing eye, checking hips and teeth the way she would a broodmare. There are no proposals on bended knee, no lovesick poetry whispered in candlelit rooms. Marriage contracts are struck with handshakes, with blessings muttered over mugs of ale, with cows traded and debts settled. You accept this because you must. To stay single too long is suspicious. It hints at stubbornness, or worse, at deviance. A man unmarried by 20, a woman unmarried by 16. People talk, the priest frowns. Neighbors whisper, better to bind your life to someone else's and hope they can carry the burden of survival beside you. Weddings are simple affairs. A mass in the cold stone church, a few coins slipped into the priest's palm for the blessing. A shared meal afterward if the harvest has been kind. Bread, ale, maybe a meat pie if someone was lucky in trapping rabbits. Afterward, life continues exactly as before, only harder. Now there are 2 of you to feed, to clothe, to shelter. Soon there will be 3 and 4 and children come fast and often because many do not survive. You watch as your wife or your own body, if you're a woman, endures birth after agonizing birth, often without a trained midwife, often without clean cloth or steady hands. Each child is a blessing and a gamble, another potential worker or another tiny grave in the frozen churchyard. You love them fiercely, but you learn not to expect too much. Attachment is a dangerous luxury in a world where death hovers like smoke on the wind. And still, you rise each morning before the sun, bending your body to the fields, to the endless cycle of hope and disappointment that is the life of a medieval peasant. You do not dream of riches anymore. You dream of enough. Enough food to fill your children's bellies. Enough wood to keep the fire burning through January. Enough health to see one more spring. Enough strength to die with your boots on. And maybe, just maybe, a priest at your deathbed to mumble the right words in time to save your soul. You learn quickly that the world beyond your village is both vast and dangerously irrelevant. Travel is rare for peasants. You live and die within sight of the same crooked trees, the same weary fields, the same narrow river that cuts its lazy way through the marshes. The road that winds past your village leads to other towns, other manors, but it might as well lead to another planet. Why would you leave? You are tied to the land, both legally and practically. You owe labor and rent to your lord. If you vanish, the bailiff will hunt you down like a lost sheep. Worse, traveling is expensive and perilous. Bandits haunt the forest tracks, and wolves prowl the edges of lonely fields at night. Every crossroads could hide a thief. Every innkeeper could be a cheat. Besides, you have no coin to spare. The little money you scrape together, selling surplus eggs or bundles of firewood, vanishes quickly. Rents, tithes, ale, a bit of wool in the winter to patch holes in your only tunic. On rare occasions, a traveling merchant sets up a rough stall near the village green. His wares seem like miracles: brightly dyed ribbons, tin spoons, small polished mirrors. You stare at them with wide eyes, knowing they are forever out of reach. You barter when you can. A few eggs for a length of rough cloth, a handful of carrots for a small iron nail, a rare and precious thing. Coins themselves feel almost mythological. More often, barter is your only currency. The rare glimpse of nobility leaves a deep mark on you. Maybe once a year the Lord's hunting party rides through the village. Their arrival is heralded by the barking of hounds, the clatter of hooves, and the gleam of steel and silk. Men armored in shining mail, with plumes bobbing from their helms, thunder past while you and your fellow villagers scatter like frightened birds. You're expected to bow low as they pass, not meeting their eyes, head bent so they can ride by without seeing the dirt and hunger etched into your faces. Sometimes you wonder what it would feel like to sit atop such a horse, wrapped in furs, a sword at your hip, the world bowing before you. But the thought is dangerous. It brings only dissatisfaction, and in your world, dissatisfaction can be fatal. You hear tales from the older villagers of serfs who rebelled, who refused to pay taxes or tried to flee. Stories of men dragged back in chains lashed to within an inch of their lives, made examples for all to see. You learn that patience and obedience are survival tactics, not virtues. Even speaking ill of your lord over mugs of weak ale in the darkness of your hut requires glances over your shoulder. The lord's reeve, his steward, and even his bailiffs pass through the village regularly, gathering dues, enforcing laws, listening for whispers of dissent. You live under invisible watchmen, and if you ever forget it, there are always the stocks in the village square, empty but waiting. Religion offers you both hope and terror. The church is the one stone building in your world, looming gray and cold over the mud huts like a fortress. Its bell tolls not just for mass, but to mark the rhythms of your day, the Angelus at sunrise, the call to prayers at noon, the solemn tolling at sunset. Inside, it's no warmer than outside. The stone walls weep moisture. The wooden pews are hard and unforgiving. Candles sputter weakly against the gloom. The priest speaks in Latin, a language as mysterious to you as the stars. His sermons are long, winding lectures about sin and salvation, about hellfire and damnation. You don't understand every word, but the tone is clear enough. You are a sinner. You were born a sinner. You will likely die a sinner. Your only hope lies in confession, penance, obedience, and the intercession of the saints, whose wooden statues stand along the walls, staring down at you with blank, pitiless eyes. The Virgin Mary is your favorite. She seems softer, kinder, less terrifying than the bloodied Christ hanging above the altar. You mumble prayers to her at night, especially when your mother coughs in her sleep, or when the wind howls so hard it feels like the very sky might rip apart. Saints are local celebrities. Each village tends to have its favorites. Saint Cuthbert for healing, Saint George for courage, Saint Sebastian for protection from plagues. Small offerings, wildflowers, candles, crude carvings pile up at their shrines. Your life is a tightrope, strung between desperation and devotion. You cannot read the Bible. You cannot interpret doctrine. You rely entirely on the priest to tell you what God wants. And because the priest speaks for God, his word is law, second only to the Lord's. Confession is mandatory. You kneel on splintered wood, heart pounding, whispering your sins, stealing an extra crust of bread, skipping a prayer, harboring anger toward the reeve. Penance follows. 3 days fasting, a dozen prayers, a pilgrimage. If your sin is grave enough, you perform these tasks not out of love, but out of fear. Hell is not an abstract idea. It is a daily terror, fiery, eternal, waiting just one misstep away. And in a world where your body already suffers so much, the idea of unending torment after death is more horrifying than you can bear to imagine. So, you obey, you bow, you confess, you scrape by, hoping that maybe your soul will find a place of rest when your bones are dust. As the seasons grind on, so too does your body. By your early 20s, your hands are a roadmap of scars. Your back aches in the mornings, and your knees creak when you bend to tie your shoes, or what's left of them. Most peasants go barefoot much of the year, even into the early chills of autumn, because leather is precious and must be saved for the winter months. Despite your youth by modern standards, you are already what today would be considered middle-aged. Marriage solidifies your existence into a new rhythm. If you're a man, you work the same strips of land your father did, paying rent in wheat and barley, in labor and loyalty. If you're a woman, your days are a brutal ballet of childbearing, weaving, cooking, tending gardens, and surviving. Children come quickly, too quickly. Sometimes, each pregnancy is a gamble. Will the child live? Will the mother survive? The midwife is there with her salted prayers and bundles of herbs, but there is only so much she can do. If a birth goes wrong, there's no surgeon waiting with sterile instruments. There's just blood, screaming, and a silent, grim-faced priest, ready to baptize a dying infant. And yet the children come. If they survive the deadly first year, the cradle-grave period, they become the next set of laborers. Tiny hands, learning to weed gardens, chase chickens, fetch water, and clean hearth. You teach them the same way you were taught, without tenderness, without time for coddling. Every hour matters. Every mouth must earn its keep. You work side by side with your children in the fields. You watch their faces burn under the sun, their fingers crack from the cold. You see your life mirrored in theirs, and feel both pride and a deep, aching sadness you don't have the luxury to name. You live for the seasons. Spring means plowing and planting. Summer means long days of weeding and chasing off crows. Autumn means harvesting from dawn until dusk, until your fingers bleed. Winter means survival. Always survival. In winter, the world shrinks to the size of the hearth. Days are short, nights are endless. The winds scream through the trees like angry ghosts, and the village huddles closer together, not for warmth but for shared human presence, a reminder that you are not yet. Food stores dwindle, rats gnaw at the edges of sacks. You ration everything. No one eats their fill. No one dares. A pot of thin pottage simmers over the fire most days. Gruel made from whatever dried peas, oats, or cabbage you manage to save. Meat, if any, is a tough, stringy memory of better months. Sickness thrives in the cramped, damp conditions. Fevers spread. Coughs deepen into death rattles. You lose neighbors. Sometimes entire families vanish in the span of a month. The smoke from their chimneys snuffed out like a candle. And through it all, the church bells continue to toll. For births, for deaths, for mass, for reminders that God's mercy must be begged for constantly. Confession becomes more desperate in winter. After all, no one wants to die with a soul stained by sin. You kneel on frozen stone floors, praying your sins are not too heavy, that your confessions are not too late. Because death is not a distant thing here. Death is a neighbor, an occasional dinner guest, a figure lurking just outside the doorway, waiting patiently. Yet, even in the harshest months, there are moments of small, stubborn joy. A warm loaf of bread, pulled fresh from the communal oven, a successful trapping of a rabbit, enough to make a stew rich enough to silence hunger for a night, the birth of a healthy calf, a clear, crisp day, when the sun seems to stretch just a little longer across the barren fields, promising that winter will not last forever. These moments are your wealth. You gather them the way kings gather gold. You hold them tight against your heart, hoarding them against the long darkness, because they must last, because they are all you have. Life for a medieval peasant is a constant gamble against forces you cannot control. Weather, disease, war, lord's fate. You wake up every morning betting that you will make it through another day. Some years are kind. Some years are cruel. But always, life continues. You continue. Because you must. The seasons keep grinding forward, each one leaving its mark on you. By now, your body is a hardened tool, shaped by the demands of your environment. You can judge the coming weather by the ache in your joints. You can walk barefoot across fields of sharp stubble without flinching. You can carry a bushel of wheat, twice your own weight, on a back bent by years of labor. You have become what the world demanded: resilient, enduring, unyielding. But endurance does not shield you from everything. There are threats more devastating than hunger, more cruel than the Lord's, more relentless than the winter wind. The first is disease. Plague is a word that makes even the toughest men blanch. You hear the whispers long before it reaches your village, rumors carried by traveling merchants, by priests with trembling hands, by refugees begging for scraps at the edge of the forest. At first, you don't believe it. You want to think the sickness is just another bad harvest rumor, the kind that blows over like a summer storm. But then the coughing starts. One family falls ill, then another. The sick are shunned, their doors marked with crude symbols or left swinging open in grim acknowledgement. The village priest hurries from hut to hut, administering last rites as fast as he can mutter the Latin words. You are told not to visit neighbors, not to gather at the communal well, not to leave offerings at the church door without washing your hands in vinegar. If you can find any, it doesn't help. The sickness moves faster than you can avoid it. You watch as the strongest men you know, men who could plow a field in a day, who could wrestle a bull to the ground, wither in hours, their bodies racked with fever and blackened sores. You hear the wet rattle of death in the night. You smell the sour stench of decay even when the windows are shuttered. You bury more neighbors than you can remember, sometimes 3 or 4 to a pit dug hastily behind the churchyard. You pray harder. You fast longer. You offer what little you have to the saints. Still, death comes. It always comes. The second great enemy is war. You have little to do with kings and crowns. You care little for who sits on a distant throne. But war has a way of finding even the smallest, most forgotten corners of the world. It begins subtly. The reeve demands more grain for the Lord's soldiers. The best oxen are taken to pull wagons of supplies. Men are conscripted, torn from their fields to fight wars they barely understand. If you are unlucky enough to be chosen, there is no arguing. You are handed a pike, perhaps a padded tunic if your lord is generous, and marched off with little more training than what a village brawl might teach. If you survive the battles, an enormous if, you return to a village diminished, with your fields overgrown, your family weaker, your future even more uncertain. And if armies pass through your village, God help you. Soldiers, both friend and foe, take what they want. Chickens, bread, ale, daughters. They burn houses for firewood. They leave disease and hunger in their wake. Your tiny, fragile existence is crushed beneath their boots, as if you were nothing more than an ant. You are nothing to them, just another piece of earth to be conquered, consumed, and discarded. And yet, amid all this horror, life continues. Babies are born, fields are planted, songs are sung. You learn that even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, people cling to whatever scraps of normalcy they can find. The women of the village still gather to spin wool and gossip. The men still sharpen plows and patch fences. The children still chase each other across the fields, laughing without understanding the weight that presses on their parents' shoulders. It's a kind of stubbornness, a refusal to let the world grind you down completely. You hold on to the rituals, to the bread, blessed at harvest, to the small wooden cross hanging over your hearth, to the stories whispered by firelight about saints, heroes, and miracles. Maybe you don't really believe all of it. Maybe you do. It hardly matters. Belief, like work, is part of survival. You learn something else too, something no priest will ever say outright. In a world this cruel, small joys matter more than anything. A good harvest, a warm loaf of bread, the first cry of a newborn baby, strong and healthy, a soft rain after a long drought, a moment of laughter shared over a cracked mug of ale. These are not luxuries. They are necessities. They are what keep you from collapsing entirely. Because in the end, the real victory isn't escaping death. It's living fully in the moments before it comes. You notice the changes first in the subtle shifts of the village. A few more empty cottages, a few more fields left to grow wild with weeds. The bell at the church tolls more often, low and mournful, yet somehow life doesn't stop. It just reshapes itself, like water finding a new course after a flood. In a strange way, survival becomes easier after the worst years. With fewer mouths to feed, those who remain can claim more land. Fewer hands to tax means a lighter burden on each villager. Grain stores once stretched thin to cover the teeming families of the village suddenly seem more plentiful. You find yourself with a little more bread, a little more wool, a little more meat. For a moment, it almost feels like hope, but hope is a dangerous thing for a peasant. It's during these strange, uncertain times that you notice something else, a growing sense of your own worth. Not as an individual necessarily. The idea of individual rights would have sounded laughable to your ears. But as a group, the peasants begin to sense that maybe they are not as powerless as they once thought. When the Lord demands higher taxes to pay for another of his petty wars, the village reeve finds himself arguing with groups of peasants who murmur about fairness, about hardship, about rights. When the local priest rages from the pulpit about obedience and loyalty, the congregation's murmured amens feel thinner, less wholehearted. It is the slowest of awakenings, No one stands on a hay bale shouting for revolution. No one dares defy the Lord outright, but the seed is planted. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the peasants deserve more than endless suffering. You are not alone in these thoughts. All across England and much of Europe, peasants begin to grumble louder. They are weary of taxes, weary of wars, weary of dying like flies, while the lords feast and the priests grow fat. In the coming decades, these small whispers will swell into great roars. Peasant revolts, demands for better treatment, bloody clashes that shake kingdoms to their roots. But for now, you are just one more soul shivering in a draughty hut, wondering if life could be different. You wonder too about things you were taught not to question. Why must you toil endlessly when the Lord's Son rides past, laughing atop a glossy horse? Why must you pray for mercy from a God who seems to favor the rich and punish the poor? Why does a single slip, a missed tithe, a mumbled insult, a stolen chicken lead to punishment as brutal as any crime? The questions fester like an old wound. But still, you work. Still, you pray. Still, you hope, because what else can you do? Amid all the struggle, there are still moments of connection that make the grind bearable. You gather with neighbors for harvest feasts, drinking ale until your ribs ache from laughing at old jokes. You sit by the fire with your family, telling stories passed down through generations, tales of heroes who outwitted tyrants, of clever peasants who tricked cruel lords, of humble men and women who found favor with the saints. You watch the seasons change, the golden flush of autumn, the stark, skeletal trees of winter, the bright explosion of green in spring, the buzzing fullness of summer. The world is a hard place, but it is also endlessly beautiful, if you have the strength to see it. Sometimes, in the rare quiet moments when the fields are plowed, the animals fed, and the hearth lit, you allow yourself to dream, not of castles or crowns, but of simple things. A life without hunger, a winter without death, a Lord who might see you as more than just another pair of calloused hands. You know it's foolish, but even foolish dreams have their place, especially in a life where reality is so often cruel. You survive because you must. You endure because you have no other choice. And somewhere deep inside you, deeper than hunger, deeper than fear, there is a stubborn spark that refuses to go out. The same spark that once made men build their first huts from mud and straw. The same spark that might, one day, build something greater, something better, something worth all the suffering. But for now, you rise with the dawn, bend your back to the plow, and walk the worn path your ancestors trod before you. Because it is the only path you know, because it is enough, because you are still here. If there's one constant you can count on in your life, it's the land. It demands everything and gives little, but it is the anchor around which your entire existence turns. Spring comes with a fury of tasks. Before the last frost fully recedes, you're out in the fields, hacking at the hard ground with heavy wooden plows, strapped to lumbering oxen. The soil is stubborn and heavy, clinging to your boots and stealing your strength with every labored step. Planting must be timed with agonizing precision. Too early, and a surprise frost will kill the seedlings. Too late, and the crops won't ripen before the bitter chill returns. You sow barley, rye, oats, staples that will, if the weather holds, form the backbone of your meager survival. Wheat is more valuable, but trickier to grow. You reserve the best, sunniest strips of land for it, praying under your breath as you cast the seeds by hand. Every handful of seed feels like a gamble. Every furrow is a prayer. As the seasons warm, the village bursts into a frenzy of life. Animals breed, filling the pens with squawking, squealing chaos. Gardens must be planted too. Plots of cabbage, leeks, onions, garlic, crops you'll lean on heavily when winter drains your strength and spirit. There's no such thing as a quiet day. Even children too young to sow are put to work chasing birds from the fields, carrying water to the laborers, gathering sticks for fuel. Your skin darkens from sun exposure, toughens until it feels more like leather than flesh. Insects swarm, sweat stings your eyes. You scratch flea bites until they bleed, knowing that infected wounds can easily spiral into deadly fevers. Still, you labor, because missing a planting season is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence. By high summer, exhaustion becomes a constant companion. You move through your days in a haze of hunger and heat, counting time not in hours but in tasks. First light, milk the goats, muck the pens. Mid-morning, haul water from the well, weed the crops, mend the broken tools. Midday, stagger through the heat, repairing the stone walls that keep animals out of the fields. Evening, gather wild berries if there's time, tend the hearth, collapse into sleep the moment your body stops moving. Leisure exists only as stolen moments. A gulp of cold water under a shady tree. A hurried conversation with a neighbor about the coming harvest. A rare smile traded with your wife over a half-shared memory of a younger, lighter day. Then comes the harvest. Harvest season is a hurricane that engulfs the village for weeks. You rise before the sun and don't lay down until the stars scatter across the black sky. Every able-bodied soul, from stooping grandmothers to children barely tall enough to carry sheaves, is pressed into service. Sickles flash like fish scales in the sunlight. Grain falls in waves, piled into great mounds that must be bundled, carted, threshed, and stored before the autumn rains ruin everything. The Lord's share comes first. You load the fattest sheaves onto the manor carts, handing over your best oats, your finest wheat, under the baleful eyes of the steward. Your family's survival comes second, if there's enough left. You work yourself to the edge of collapse because you know that what you harvest now must sustain you through a winter that offers no second chances. There are no grocery stores, no emergency reserves, only the thin layer of grain and salted meat and dried beans that stands between you and starvation. Yet harvest season is also a time of brief, wild celebration. Once the grain is in, the village erupts into a rough, joyous festival. There is music, pipes and drums beaten on worn skins. There is dancing, wild and clumsy and exhilarating. There is food, fresh bread, pies stuffed with whatever meat or berries could be spared, even precious hoarded ale spilled in laughter and generosity. For a few precious hours, the weight lifts from your shoulders. You are not just a laborer, a tax burden, a speck of dirt in the Lord's ledger. You are part of something bigger, a community, a tradition, a people who endure. You sing songs you don't fully understand, songs older than your grandfather's grandfather. You hold your wife's roughened hand in yours and spin her around the village green until both of you are laughing too hard to stand. You watch the children run shrieking between the bonfires, and for a brief moment, dare to hope that maybe, just maybe, they will have an easier life. Of course, the dawn after the festival is brutal. You wake with a pounding head, a mouth dry as dust, and blisters raised from dancing barefoot on the hard-packed earth. But you also wake with a small, stubborn sense of defiance burning in your chest. You have celebrated. You have harvested. You have endured another year. No tax, no famine, no lord or priest can take that away from you. You tie your boots, pick up your worn sickle, and walk back into the fields. Because the land still needs you. Because winter is coming. Because life grim, glorious, grinding life marches on. And you, peasant, will march with it. The year slips away from you like water through your fingers. You feel it in your bones, in the weight of your tired body, in the grinding of your teeth as you sleep. Time is no longer marked by the months, but by the tasks that must be done, and the inevitable passing of the seasons. Autumn arrives with its deep golden light, a brief reprieve before the long, cruel winter. You spend the harvest days working hard to store the last of your crops and preserve what little meat you have left. Canning, salting, smoking, any method to keep what you can from the harsh, hungry months ahead. The village grinds along, the same steady rhythm of labor, just a little quieter now, as the days shorten and the fields fall silent. You know this is the time to prepare, for winter is a hard beast, and it will come fast. The cold creeps in slowly at first, a chill at the edges of your bones, as the leaves wither on the trees, but it soon becomes biting. The days turn gray, the skies heavy with the threat of snow. Your hut grows colder and colder, and you keep the fire stoked with what little wood you have left, burning through it like a desperate soul, hoarding the last of its resources. Winter in the village is an entirely different world. Everything slow. The fields lie dormant, covered in frost, awaiting the rebirth of spring. The river freezes over, leaving the land blanketed in the quiet sound of ice cracking in the night. People huddle inside their homes, gathering around the hearths and stoves. There is little to do outside, except prepare for the next day's work, and if you're lucky, catch enough rest to start the cycle over again. The lack of sunlight gnaws at your soul. You become familiar with the feel of your hands as they crack, split, and ache from too many hours spent in the cold. You know that keeping the fire fed is critical, as a cold hearth means a cold home, and the cold can kill you faster than a bad harvest ever could. The village itself seems smaller during winter. The buildings, dark and quiet, are more like prisons than homes, and the land feels like an empty, lifeless husk beneath the ever-present gray clouds. But then comes the blessing of snow. The snow transforms everything. It softens the hard edges of the world and blankets the streets with a quiet stillness. For a brief moment, the noise of the world outside fades. The villagers huddle together even more tightly, and the children, those lucky enough to still have energy, race through the fresh powder, their small faces red and frozen from laughter. There's something almost magical in the way snow makes everything feel distant, like the world is holding its breath. But snow also hides dangers. Food runs out faster than it should, and the roads become impassable. You hear whispers about the poor who live beyond the village's edge, people who don't have the means to stockpile enough food or find shelter. They're always the first to suffer. By January, the village's own stores are low. You have enough to keep your family alive for a time, but there are no guarantees. And you hear stories. You hear rumors. Hunger is a common enemy in winter. Hunger. There is no escaping it, even in the best of years. It hangs over you like a storm cloud. The first pangs of hunger are easy enough to ignore, but as the winter months drag on, it becomes harder and harder to push away the gnawing ache in your stomach. You try to stretch what little you have. You scrape the last bits of grain from the bottom of the sack, grind what's left into rough flour, and make thin loaves of bread that you hope will fill you. You eat less. You give the children what scraps remain, hoping their bodies can fight off the cold and stave off the hunger longer than your own. The village is no different. The whispers about missing livestock, about hunters whose traps aren't returning with any meat, grow louder. Sometimes you see the hollowed faces of your neighbors, hollow not from age, but from the quiet, creeping terror that comes with hunger. If you can survive through the worst of it, if the snow thaws and the spring comes, then you will live another year. If not, your name will fade like so many others who have gone before you. People might mention you in passing, the way they speak of lost relatives or neighbors who've disappeared from sight. They might whisper your name as if it's just another forgotten echo in the world. Survival is never a certainty in your world. But there are moments when you catch yourself thinking of something more, something beyond the shackles of your work, beyond the plows and the fields. Perhaps it's freedom, that tantalizing dream the noblemen and priests always talk about but never seem to share. They own the land, the church, the laws that govern you. You toil, you suffer, you endure, but you are not free. But for all the hardship, for all the injustices, you have this. You have the right to live another day. It is a small thing to hold on to, but it is yours. And when the first sign of spring arrives, when the ice on the river cracks, when the first buds appear on the trees, your heart surges with gratitude. You look over the barren landscape and know that you have made it once again. You will survive, and you will work the soil and harvest the crops that will see you through another year. You take pride in the work, pride in the survival. That pride, tiny as it may seem to the world beyond, is what will keep you alive. The first signs of spring are a miracle, almost divine. When the snow finally begins to retreat, when the heavy grip of winter releases its hold on the village, it's like a floodgate of possibility opens. For the first time in months, the earth beneath your feet feels solid and warm, not frozen and unforgiving. The air smells different, fresh, sweet, as if the world is taking a deep, careful breath after being suffocated by winter's breath. The hardest time of the year is over, for now anyway. There's a feeling in the air as you take your first steps back onto the damp, muddy fields, an anticipation of something greater, something better. The work isn't over, but the worst of it is behind you. You can start looking forward to growth, to renewal, to that faint hope that this year might bring you something more than just surviving. But those hopes are brief. This is, after all, the life of a peasant. The work immediately shifts from the frozen, still landscape of winter to the frantic activity of spring planting. You rise early, before the sun fully breaks through the gray horizon, and you step outside to find the village already alive with sound and motion. The plows are pulled by oxen, heavy and stubborn, scraping across fields that now seem both fertile and terrifying. The task seems endless. The earth, still heavy with the cold from the past months, resists the plow, but you press on. The grains you plant are vital: barley, oats, rye, all necessary for what comes next. Each grain you plant is a small hope, a fragile thing that must survive long enough to feed you in the coming months. It's a delicate, tiresome dance. The fields will need water, protection, and care. You spend hours watching over the crops, making sure they have enough space to grow, enough sunlight to ripen. You go back to the same patch of land, day after day, staring at rows of plants that have yet to show their promise. And yet, there's no time to worry about it too much. The weeds need to be cleared. The fence posts need to be checked. The animals need feeding, their pens cleaned, their legs inspected for cuts or injuries. The rhythm is set. Your body, though exhausted, becomes accustomed to it. You can feel the muscles in your back, arms and legs tighten and stretch in response to the unending work. But you push through because there is no choice. There is never a choice. Summer arrives quickly and brings with it the most brutal heat. It's relentless. The sweat drips down your face as you work beneath a sun that seems determined to burn the earth itself. You rarely get any relief. Even the evenings, when the sun finally dips below the horizon, still feel like a furnace. There are fewer moments to rest now. The crops must be watched carefully as they grow, and the animals must be tended to with constant attention. You spend your days moving from one task to another, from watering crops to feeding livestock, to repairing the roof of your hut before the rains come again. There are moments, fleeting though they are, when you stop and look around, catching your breath for just a second. When you watch your children, your own flesh and blood, running wild through the fields, laughing as they play a game, Only they understand. You can't remember the last time you laughed like that. You can't remember the last time you had the luxury of enjoying something without thinking about work. But you make the best of it. You smile, even though you're bone tired. You encourage them to run, to play. You tell yourself that this is the best you can offer them. A few moments of childhood before they must, too, learn the weight of the earth beneath their feet. As the season rolls on, the harvest looms, the work intensifies. The fields must be cut down before the storms ruin everything. You and your family, sometimes with the help of neighbors, work from dawn until dusk. Your hands raw, your bodies aching, your spirits frayed, and the whole time, you are in constant fear of a bad harvest. It's always in the back of your mind, a quiet dread that wraps around your thoughts like a vine. If the harvest fails, your survival is in jeopardy. Without that crop, there is no food for the winter. Without enough to store, you risk running out long before the snow thaws again. The village murmurs about the possibility of famine. You hear talk about distant lands ravaged by disease, fields where crops failed because of blight, villages that saw their food stores emptied in a matter of weeks. You cannot shake the feeling that it could be your village next, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The tension in the air is palpable. No matter how much you work, no matter how much you sacrifice, the end result is still up to the whims of the gods. The seasons, the unpredictable forces of nature that care nothing for your sweat and toil. And yet, you keep pushing. You keep planting, harvesting, sowing, praying. You keep working, even when you feel like there's nothing left to give. Because this is your life. It's the life of every peasant. But then, just when it seems like the world may crush you underfoot, you reach the harvest. The fields, after months of backbreaking labor, are finally ready. You've gathered what you can, and though the piles of grain might not be as large as you had hoped, there's enough. There's enough to keep your family fed, enough to trade at the market, enough to store away for the winter. Your body aches, but the satisfaction of a successful harvest floods you with a sense of accomplishment. Your hard work paid off, despite everything. You look over the rows of gathered grain and know that for one more season, you have survived. You've done it. You've lived. The harvest is over, but the struggle is far from finished. With the fields cleared and the grain safely stored, or at least mostly safe from rats and rot, your focus shifts to winter prep. This is a time of critical importance, because in truth, you will not make it through the cold months without preparation. One misstep now, one failed storehouse or poorly repaired roof, and your family could be left exposed to the elements with nothing but the desperate remnants of a harvest already gone by. First, the firewood. Each family is expected to gather enough to last until spring, but it is not always enough. The trees in the village woods have already been thinned out over the years, and the deeper forest is restricted by the Lord's hunting rights. You and your neighbors often spend long, cold afternoons foraging for dead branches, cutting down what few trees remain in the surrounding area, or begging the Lord's forester for permission to take wood from a nearby grove. The wood must be chopped, stacked, and covered. It must dry before it can be burned. The longer you delay, the less fuel you'll have when the biting cold winds howl down from the north. Then there's the clothing. What little you have must be patched and mended. You check the wool blankets, the fur-lined cloaks, and the rough-hewn tunics. You are lucky if you've managed to keep some of the more resilient garments intact, but this is a time of wear and tear. Clothes are patched until the fabric can no longer hold, and some of the heavier garments simply don't survive another winter. For the first time in months, your mind turns to the children, and you realize just how quickly they've outgrown everything. The shoes are too small, the tunics are too tight, and the little ones shiver even under the warmth of the hearth. You trade what you have at the market: grain, eggs, perhaps a fattened chicken, to get what you can. A second-hand cloth, a worn but usable coat, maybe even a few extra scraps of wool. It's never enough. And then there's the meat. With winter fast approaching, the hunt becomes essential. Game is hunted and salted to preserve it for the long months ahead. Rabbits, deer, and wild boar are prized, but you're lucky to catch even a few rabbits. You and your neighbors learn to make do with what you have. Sometimes that's salted fish, sometimes it's a stew made from the last of the root vegetables, but every meal is carefully rationed, measured against the dwindling days before the first snow falls. As the days shorten and the sun sinks lower in the sky, you can't escape the creeping realization the cold is coming, and it's coming with a vengeance. Your children notice it too. Their skin is paler now, their cheeks tinged with the unmistakable flush of chill that never quite leaves. The house, no matter how much firewood is thrown into the hearth, seems perpetually damp and freezing. The damp stone floor seems to leach warmth from your bones. Outside, the first light dusting of snow falls, just enough to remind you of what's to come. The winds grow harsher, and with each passing day, the nights lengthen, leaving the village in darkness for longer and longer stretches. The village priest continues his work as usual, his sermons as long and incomprehensible as ever. He speaks about the coming of the Christ child and the importance of keeping faith through difficult times. You nod along, though. Honestly, his words are just a ritual now. When your stomach aches and the cold gnaws at your bones, you know your survival is not in his hands or in anyone else's. You spend the last few weeks before winter wrapped up in constant preparation, racing against the elements. The firewood is stacked, the food preserved. Your children are kept indoors for as long as possible, their cheeks flushed from the chill and their small hands numb from fetching water or gathering firewood. And then, one morning, the snow arrives in full force. It's not the soft, gentle fall of snowflakes you might imagine. It's an overwhelming deluge of ice and wind, thick enough to block out the sun and swallow the earth whole. The wind howls through the narrow streets, biting at your skin even as you shield your eyes against the blinding storm. The roads become impassable, the river frozen solid. You and your family retreat into your hut, shivering under thick wool blankets, trying to preserve the warmth of the fire. The hearth crackles and hisses as you watch the snow pile higher and higher, cutting you off from the outside world. Inside, your family survives on what you've gathered: a few remaining chickens, dried salted fish, barley, and turnips. If you're lucky, there will be a meal each day, but you know the reality. If the storm stretches long enough, you could be forced to dig into your grain reserves earlier than planned, and that means a far leaner winter. The days drag on. No one visits. The few who have managed to travel through the snow, trudging through the white drifts to reach the village, arrive with thin, exhausted faces, and the whispers begin. The word famine begins to echo in hushed voices. The threat is ever present. It's not just the weather that will decide whether you live or die. It's how long the supplies will last, how long the village can hold out before the stores run dry. And still, you endure. You endure because it's all you can do. There's no other option. You huddle together with your family in the dim light of the fire. The children, still young enough to dream, play games of make-believe, using bits of straw and sticks to form simple toys. You smile at their innocence, their joy, but you know deep down that in this world, no one is spared for long, no one lives forever, and survival is the only thing that matters in the end. You live through it all, through the heat, through the bitter cold, through the hunger, through the pain, and when the first signs of spring arrive once again, you will begin again. For now, you hold tight to those fleeting moments of joy, when the fire crackles, when the children laugh, when the world outside seems far away. Winter, with its long, harsh grip, feels never-ending. The snow piles higher, blanketing everything, leaving the world eerily silent. Even the animals retreat into their dens, hiding from the brutal cold. You can't remember the last time the sun shone for more than a few moments. The days stretch on like dark, suffocating tunnels, and you feel yourself slipping into a kind of dull, hazy existence. The work has stopped for the most part. There's no plowing, no planting, no tending to the crops. But the work isn't really over. Winter might have frozen the earth, but it has not frozen the hunger. You become intimately familiar with the deep ache in your stomach, the gnawing, endless hunger that only grows worse as the months drag on. There's not enough food. There's never enough food. The chickens, the last of your livestock, have been eaten, their meat salted and stored, then rationed until only scraps remain. What you thought would be enough to last the winter was never enough. Not when the cold sucked the warmth from the hearth and the wind howled like wolves just beyond the door. At times you wonder if your family will make it. How much longer can you survive on the bitter scraps that remain? Will the spring come soon enough, or will you run out of food before the thawing earth offers any respite? The thought haunts you, chipping away at your will to keep going. Your children grow quieter. They do not ask for food, knowing there is little to offer. Instead, they huddle together for warmth, their eyes dimmer than before, their bodies growing thinner, their cheeks a little more sunken each week. You try to keep their spirits up with stories, tales of the saints and their miraculous feats, of heroes from the old days who triumphed against impossible odds. You do it not for their benefit, but for your own, because somewhere deep inside, you still believe that if you can make them laugh, if you can make them forget, even for a moment, the hunger gnawing at their bellies, you might somehow keep the darkness at bay. But even you can feel the weight of it, the weight of the cold, the weight of the hunger, the weight of everything. The winter solstice comes, marking the longest night of the year. For peasants like you, this night is a cruel reminder of how far from the warmth and comfort of the nobility you are. For them, this is a time for feasts, lavish banquets, and the warmth of firelight dancing off golden goblets. For you, the solstice is just another long, freezing night, spent hunched around a flickering fire, wrapped in threadbare blankets, desperately hoping for dawn. You can hear the howling wind outside, rattling the door, creaking at the windows. The hearth is still stoked with what little wood you have left, but it burns too quickly, leaving nothing but embers before long. The house grows colder with each passing hour. The night is silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the muffled sounds of your own breathing. You try to sleep, but it's difficult when your body is cold from the inside out, and your mind races with worries of what tomorrow will bring. You clutch your children close, their small bodies providing some comfort against the cold, but even their warmth cannot completely thaw the chill that has seeped into your bones. You dream of a warm spring, of food in abundance, of a life not bound to endless struggle. But in this life, dreams are a luxury. Survival is the only reality. By the time the snow begins to melt, by the time the first signs of spring crack the icy shell of winter, you are a different person. The toll of the months has worn you down. You have aged in ways you cannot describe. Your face hollowed, your hands more calloused than ever. Your children, too, are changed. They are quieter, their laughter less frequent. Their faces are too thin, their ribs too prominent. But they're still here. You're still here. And when the first green shoots poke through the frozen ground, you know that you've made it through. The land is waking up. You feel the weight of the world lighten slightly, though it is far from gone. The thaw is slow, almost imperceptible. You spend the days clearing out what remains from the bitter winter, patching roofs that have been battered by snow, tending to the animals that survived the cold. You take inventory of your supplies, though you already know how little you have left. It will be another hard year, but there's a glimmer of hope, because even after all this time, after the suffering, after the fear, you are still here. As the weather warms, you return to the fields, your hands familiar with the weight of the plow, the roughness of the soil, the steady rhythm of the work. You know what needs to be done. You plant the seeds as carefully as you can, hoping the weather will cooperate this time, praying for enough rain, enough sun. Your body remembers the labor. You remember the struggle. It is the only thing you know, and it is the only thing you can rely on. You will do whatever it takes to ensure that your family survives. You will dig your hands into the dirt, sow your seeds, mend your tools, and pray for a better season, one where the crops are plentiful and the winter does not steal away all you've worked for. But deep down, even as you press on, there is something else at work, a quiet, stubborn hope. Because for all the hardship, for all the suffering, you have survived. And if you can survive this, then maybe, just maybe, you can survive anything. The spring brings relief, but it also brings the immediacy of work. You move swiftly from one task to another as the thaw softens the earth. Your hands are already calloused from the months of winter's cruel weight, but now they are back to familiar toil, sowing, planting, preparing. The village stirs with a newfound energy, as men and women, their faces worn by the past months, begin their work in earnest. There is a frantic pace to spring, a rush to plant before the rains come, and the earth hardens again. The fields become a blur of activity, where the hum of hoes against soil mixes with the calls of children chasing hens and the occasional bleat of a goat. It is the time to plant what will be your lifeblood for the coming months, and you do not waste a moment. The work is never simple. Even with a strong back and steady hands, there is always something more to be done. You pull your oxen to the farthest corners of the field, plowing deep into the rich, fertile earth, tearing through the last vestiges of the frost. It feels almost sacred, like this is the one time each year when the earth cooperates with your needs, when the sky blesses you with the conditions you require to live. You plant barley, wheat, and oats, essential crops, each one vital to your survival. The grain will be harvested in late summer, just in time for the coming winter's hunger. The oats will feed your livestock. The barley will be your bread, your beer, your staple. But planting is only the beginning. The seasons are fickle. In early summer, the promise of a good crop begins to look distant as dark clouds gather in the sky. You feel a familiar tightness in your chest as the storm rolls in, thunder grumbling in the distance. You know what a downpour means. Too much rain can flood the fields, drown the seedlings, ruin everything. The rain comes, and it is relentless. It soaks the fields, turning the earth into a thick, soupy mud. You curse the sky, curse the rain, curse the endless wait for the sun. You watch helplessly as the young shoots of wheat and barley begin to drown in the pooled water. The earth seems to be eating your labor, swallowing it up in muddy waves. Your crops are delicate, easily destroyed. You think back to the few years when you watched the grains grow fat and golden in the fields. But that is only a memory now, fading under the weight of too many bad years. This year, too much rain means no solid harvest. The seeds you planted with such careful hope may not survive. You can't control the weather. You can't control anything. Not the taxes that keep rising. Not the lords who demand more and more from your already meager share. Not the creeping shadow of famine that threatens every crop you grow. You can only wait, watch, pray. Then, as if in some cruel joke played by the heavens, the rain stops, but the heat returns. The same sun that once threatened your skin with its heat now presses down, relentless and scorching. The land begins to dry out too quickly, the soil cracking in places where the ground has been left barren. The plants struggle for nutrients, their leaves curling in on themselves as the roots search desperately for the water that is no longer there. You can see the signs of drought starting to take hold. The barley stalks grow thin, the wheat turns a dull, sickly color. Even the soil begins to smell different, more like dust than earth. You push forward, trying to water the crops by hand where you can, hauling water from the village well in heavy wooden buckets. But there's never enough. Then, in the final weeks of summer, as you begin to assess the damage, there is a fleeting sense of relief. The harvest is not entirely ruined. What survives, what little survives, might not be enough to feed you through the winter, but it's something. You stand among the wheat, your fingers running over the grains that remain, some ripened to golden perfection, others stunted and weak. It's bittersweet, almost a mockery of the effort you've put into your work, but it is all you have. You begin the process of harvesting what you can, working day in and day out to bring in the last of the crops. The wheat is cut by hand, and you feel every strain in your back as the sickle moves through the stalks. The summer heat presses against you like a heavy blanket, and the sweat pours down your face. You barely stop for rest. The harvest won't wait. Once the grain is brought in, it must be threshed. The hard work never seems to end. You spend hours in the barn, sifting the grains, separating the wheat from the chaff. The kernels fall into neat piles, but each pile represents hours of grinding labor. For a brief moment, as you watch the grain pile higher, you feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of hope. But that feeling is always brief. The grain might be enough to get you through the winter if the weather doesn't turn again, but it never truly feels like enough, does it? The bitter truth of survival is that you can never truly rest. Once the harvest is in, there are still repairs to be made, livestock to care for, and land to prepare for the next planting. You may take a moment's relief, but the next season always looms on the horizon, always waiting. You may not know when the next famine will hit, or when the rains will come too early or too late. This is your life, a life spent in constant preparation, constantly hoping the seasons align in your favor, constantly struggling to survive the next day, the next week, the next year. And yet, no matter how hard the world pushes, you push back, because you have no choice. By autumn, you are tired. The harvest is in, the grains stored away for winter, the animals penned up to survive the months of frost. But there is no rest. In your world, rest is an illusion, a fleeting hope that is always just out of reach. You stand at the edge of your field, hands planted firmly on your hips, eyes scanning the remnants of your labor. It's not much, you know. You've always known that. There will be no great feast this year. No piles of golden bread stacked high on your table. No woolen blankets to offer warmth beyond what the fire provides. The earth has given you just enough to survive, if the winter isn't too harsh. Enough to last through the storms, the cold, and the hunger that will surely creep in once the snow falls. You look across the land and think of the lords, the ones who are always somewhere else, always in their lavish homes, enjoying the fruits of their wealth, their lives untouched by the harshness of the seasons. You don't hate them, but there is a quiet resentment. It's a resentment that's deeply buried, hidden beneath years of hard work, hardship, and servitude. They too will survive the winter. But for them, it's just another season of luxury. For you, it is life or death. As the days grow shorter, the wind brings with it a biting chill. The sky turns slate gray as the first traces of snow dust the ground. It's not yet enough to blanket everything in white, but you know what's coming. The village starts to retreat into itself, preparing for the long cold. There are whispers in the air about the potential for a rough winter. The snow is coming fast. The days where you could leave the house without worrying about the cold are over. The doors are sealed, and your breath hangs in the air as you go about the remaining work. The fences need repairs. The roof needs patching. You don't ask for help from anyone. There's no time to. The air feels heavier now. It seems to carry a sense of foreboding, as though the land itself knows what's to come and is bracing for the impact. By late November, the village is on edge. You see the signs of winter approaching with every passing day. Snowdrifts pile against the doors of your hut. The cold seeping into your bones is unbearable at times, and you wish, with every fiber of your being, that you had more than what you could provide. Your family huddles around the fire as the days shorten. You spend hours chopping wood, trying to build enough stock to last until the snow melts in the spring. Your hands, once strong and sure, are now stiff and raw from the constant labor. You wear the same clothes from the summer, patched up and threadbare, and pray they'll last through the cold. There's no money to buy new, no way to trade for better supply. Your stomach aches from hunger. More often now, the grain stores you have left are scant, and each meal is portioned to make sure everyone gets a little. You try to hide the worst of it from the children, but even they know. They've learned the ways of hunger by now, how to go without, how to fill up on water to make it through the night. Each meal becomes an ordeal. You stretch the little you have, hoping the next batch of grain will last a little longer, or that the game traps will catch something before the end of the month. You've learned to live off scraps, to make the hunger a part of who you are. Winter arrives. The sky fills with snowflakes, swirling like a blizzard as they cut through the air. The first heavy storm buries your world under a thick blanket of ice and snow, locking the village in place. You are now fully trapped. The roads are impassable, the wind is merciless, and the cold is a constant companion. Your children begin to show the first signs of the disease that sweeps through villages during harsh winters. You can feel the fever building in their small bodies, their once vibrant faces flushed with the heat of sickness. You hold them close, hoping against hope that they will survive. You wish there was something more you could do, something beyond the simple remedies you have in your hands. But when the sickness comes, there is little to be done. There are no healers, no medicines, just you, the hearth, and what you have learned from a lifetime of surviving on scraps of knowledge passed down by your elders. When the fever breaks, you feel a moment of relief, but it's short-lived. There are no guarantees in this life, no certainty that tomorrow will be any better than today. The village is silent in winter. Everyone is either indoors, huddled for warmth, or working to repair the damage the storm has caused. The snow piles high, covering the fields and turning everything into a blank, white canvas. You know the thaw is coming, but for now, you're stuck with your family, stuck with the harsh cold, stuck with the knowledge that survival will be a gamble. Christmas comes and goes, unnoticed by the majority. For the first time in years, there is no feast, no joy, no celebration, only the grinding, relentless work of making it through the season. The church bells toll for Mass, but you don't go. You don't have the strength, the time, or the heart for it. You've seen too many dead faces in the village to care much about the arrival of Christ. The priest prays, his voice echoing in the cold stone walls of the church, but you wonder if he truly believes in what he says anymore. The world feels colder than ever, and his words seem to offer little warmth. Instead, you cling to what you know, the work, the family, the small comforts, your children's laughter, the warmth of the fire, the grain that will get you through one more day. Survival is not about hope anymore. It is about endurance. The worst of winter drags on, but it is the smallest of signs that carry the most weight now. You notice the slight change in the air. The long, cold nights are less harsh. The sun hangs lower in the sky, casting pale golden rays on the snowy ground. But the world is still frozen, trapped in the grip of winter's final stand. Even the wind, once a howling beast that stole your warmth, now feels a bit softer, as though nature is gathering its strength for something more. The trees, stripped of their leaves, creak in the wind, their limbs reaching skyward like the last desperate plea of life before the thaw. It's a strange moment. The world seems to hold its breath. The days are still long, but you feel them differently now. You've endured so much already, and you know, somewhere deep inside, that the end of this winter means the start of something new. It's almost eerie, the stillness. There's nothing to do but wait for the earth to wake from its frozen sleep. And then one day, without warning, the snow stops. It isn't much at first, a soft melting around the edges, water trickling down through cracks in the earth. The river, which had been frozen solid for months, slowly begins to creak and groan, its ice melting in slow progression, revealing the muddy, brown water that lies beneath. You feel a kind of cautious hope stirring inside you, hope mixed with dread. It's the change you've been waiting for. Spring is on the horizon, but it always feels too soon to celebrate. Food, it is the first thing you think of when the thaw begins to creep in. You pull back the door, and the cold air from the outside stings your face, but it's different this time. It's not as biting. You squint, seeing patches of green beginning to break through the wet earth. The first shoots of green are barely visible, but they give you hope, not enough to fill a stomach, but enough to fuel that small, flickering flame inside you. The flame that says, maybe we will make it, maybe we will survive. For now, the grain stores are low, and your family is thinner than you've ever seen them. Hunger is never far from your thoughts. You ration what little you have left, and you remind yourself daily that it will all be worth it in the end. As the weather changes, the grass will grow, the plants will sprout, and with it, you'll be able to feed your family. But even then, the fear lingers. What if the weather doesn't cooperate? What if the rains don't come in time? What if there's another plague, another famine, another bad year? You can't shake the feeling that this might be the last season you see a real harvest. Your stomach growls with emptiness as you look out over the field. The ground softened, but still uncertain. The work has to start again. Slowly, painfully, you gather what strength you have left and head into the fields with your hoe, your hands itching to feel the earth beneath your fingers. The first planting is always the hardest. You begin the long, exhausting process of tilling the soil, preparing it for the new crops that will hopefully carry you through the year. The land is soft now, wet and muddy, and the smell of the earth is both a relief and a reminder of just how much effort it will take to make this season work. The oxen are tired from the winter, their bodies not as strong as they should be, but you have no choice. You need them to pull the plow. Every furrow feels like an eternity, the effort both physical and mental as you push forward, no matter how heavy the task becomes. You plant barley and rye first. These are your staple crops, the ones you rely on for sustenance. They will be the bread you eat, the beer you drink, and if you're lucky, the seeds for the next crop. It's all about the cycle, the constant work of growing and harvesting, planting and praying. Each day, you are out in the fields, tilling and planting. The mornings are quiet as you work the land, but by afternoon, the village has stirred to life. The sound of hammers, axes, and hoes fills the air. Everyone has a role to play, a part to perform in the great cycle that keeps the village alive. Even your children, still young, are helping. They fetch water from the well, carry baskets of grain to the storage huts, help with small tasks that don't seem like much, but add up to a great deal over the course of the day. You watch them grow, their hands becoming calloused, just like yours. As the days lengthen, you feel the weight of your toil in every muscle, in every sore joint. You are used to exhaustion by now. It's the rhythm of your life, the drumbeat that never stops, never fades. You work until your fingers are raw, your knees ache, and your back feels as though it might break from the weight of it all. But this year, you have hope. The first green shoots are finally visible. The rain comes in fits and starts, more often than you'd like, but it's enough. The crops are starting to show signs of life. The wheat rises slowly, almost imperceptibly, from the ground, as if it too is trying to remember what it means to thrive after the long winter. And in the distance, you see the trees beginning to bud. The first hints of green are enough to make your heart race. The world is not just surviving. It's coming back to life. This is the cycle of your life. An endless dance between destruction and renewal, between hope and despair. It's a life that seems to never stop, to never give you a break. But in each small victory, each day that you and your family survive, there is something precious. There's the simple joy of seeing your children's laughter in the spring air. There's the knowledge that you made it through another winter, another round of hardship and hunger. You have survived. And that is all that matters. Spring, though welcome, is never without its burdens. The earth may thaw and the seeds may sprout, but the work is just beginning. As the days grow longer and the warmth begins to return, the landscape around you changes. The quiet of winter is replaced by the steady hum of labor. Each field needs tending. Every plow and sickle sharp, every animal fattened for the coming months. There are no vacations, no breaks in the world you live in. Each season is merely a different stage in the cycle of survival. You begin to realize that survival is not just about physical labor, it is also about mental strength. Each day, you wake with the thought of how to keep your family fed, how to ensure your children are not sent to bed hungry, how to keep them warm when the cold winds blow through your humble home. But survival has a price. It takes something from you every year, maybe not in physical form, but in the erosion of your spirit. You see your neighbors work tirelessly, their faces lined with years of toil. You see your own reflection in the muddy water of the stream. Your face aged beyond its years, your once strong hands now shaking with fatigue. Yet still, you endure. Summer brings both the hope of abundance and the threat of drought. The plants in the fields need constant care. Watering, weeding, protection from insects, and most of all, sunlight. If the rains do not come in the right measure, if the sun does not shine when it should, your crops will fail, and you will be left with nothing. The air grows thick with the scent of growing things, crops stretching toward the sky, grass pushing through the earth, the smell of hay freshly cut and stacked in bundles. The work doesn't stop, but there is a certain satisfaction in seeing the green of the land again, the crops pushing upward in defiance of the harsh months before. Your children grow alongside the crops. You watch them growing stronger and taller, each year another step toward adulthood. They are not yet old enough to fully grasp the weight of what you do, but they feel the pressure. They see the anxiety on your face when the harvest is uncertain, when there's no meat on the table, when the winter stores look like they might run out too soon. The next generation is slowly taking shape, and soon they will be the ones to toil in the fields as you did. They will carry the same weight that you carry now, learning the same lessons you were taught in the same painful, unforgiving way. You've already taught them the most important rule of life here. Never stop working, never stop struggling, because if you do, it's all over. Autumn, when it finally arrives, brings both relief and dread. The harvest must be brought in quickly. You work side by side with your neighbors, hands flying across the fields to gather every ear of wheat. every bundle of barley, every root vegetable that might last through the winter. You race against time, knowing that if the weather turns too soon, the crop will spoil before it can be stored. And the weather always turns. By mid-October, the first hard frost will have claimed the fields. The wheat you planted in spring, which you nurtured through summer's heat, will be ready for harvesting. But there is no time to celebrate. The sky is already darkening earlier. The wind has a chill to it that whispers of the coming cold. In the village, there's a slight fraying at the edges of everyone's nerves. There is no more talk of abundance, only of survival. You have to prepare your home for the long winter months. The hearth must be ready, the wood stacked, the grain stored in the barn. You worry that the storehouses won't be enough. You know that once the weather turns, there's nothing you can do but wait. You and your family work together, side by side, pulling the last of the crops from the earth. The ground is damp with the last rains of the year, and your feet sink into the muck as you work. The world becomes a blur of mud, straw, and grain. It's a never-ending cycle that repeats itself year after year, the same dance of labor, of hope, of survival. As the evening sky turns to darkness, there is a feeling that comes over you, a mix of exhaustion, relief, and dread. The harvest is in. But the work isn't over. You know that winter is the real test. The frost will come soon. The fields are empty. The work that remains is keeping the home warm, the food from spoiling, and the family safe. Winter comes, as it always does, with a quiet, chilling certainty. The cold presses down on you with the force of nature itself, as if the world has decided that the time of plenty is over, and now you must suffer. The snow falls in thick, heavy flakes, piling up against the doors, covering the roof in layers of ice and white. The chill creeps into every corner of your home, no matter how tight the walls are. Now, you can only hold on and wait. Wait for the snow to pass. Wait for the worst of the cold to go away. Wait for the spring, which seems so distant you can hardly believe it will come. But it always does, doesn't it? The thaw always comes. In the long, freezing months of winter, you pull your family closer. You huddle by the hearth, passing around what little food you have left. The fire burns low. The wind howls outside. But inside, you are all together. You know that if you don't hold each other, if you don't cling to one another in this time of need, the cold and the hunger will overtake you. It's these nights, these moments of stillness, that make you realize something important. Survival is not just about working the land, or battling the elements, or surviving the worst of the seasons. Survival is about hope. It's about finding the strength to keep going, to keep surviving, to keep working, no matter how impossible it seems. The hope that in the end, the winter will break, and the world will return to life. The hope that one day, your children will know a world that's kinder, warmer, and easier than the one you've lived in. For now, though, you survive, one day at a time, one season after the next. And when the thaw finally comes, you will begin again, because that is what you do. You endure, you survive, and you live, even when the world is doing everything it can to crush you. The thaw, when it finally comes, is not the soft awakening you had hoped for. It is harsh and violent, the earth reluctantly pulling itself free from the icy grip of winter. The snow that blanketed everything for months begins to melt, but the mud left behind is more treacherous than the frozen ground ever was. Every step you take into the fields sinks deep into the muck, and the smell of wet earth clings to your clothes and to your skin. The land that you had prayed for to begin its cycle once more is not welcoming. Instead, it's bogged down in slush and mud, heavy with the weight of its own survival. You're anxious. As you step out into the muck of the field, your hands are already stiff from the cold. The first tasks of the year must begin. You till the earth. But it's no easy task. The soil is still soaked through with winter's remnants. It clings to the edge of your hoe, holding on like an unwanted guest. You plant the first seeds of barley, the crop that will soon become your bread. The fields are not ideal. You know it, and you can feel the weight of uncertainty pressing on your chest. Will they grow? Will the rains come? Will the sun shine long enough to ripen the crops? Or will you see the same failure again? Hope is something that grows with each seed you plant and dies when the drought comes. It's a fragile thing, too fragile to think about much, but you cling to it anyway because what else is there? You can't abandon it, even if you want to. You can only keep pushing forward, keep planting, and keep praying. Spring is a reminder of everything you've lost. The flowers might bloom, but they remind you that everything else needs to be nourished to survive. The work begins again. The same tasks you performed last year, the same hopes that you planted deep in the soil. You're always hoping for a better harvest, a more bountiful year. But you know better. Nature doesn't care about your hope. She doesn't care if you're tired or hungry. She will give you what she will give you, and you will take it or leave it. Still, you labor. You feel the ground beneath your feet and tell yourself that this year the crops will grow strong. You will tend to them, you will protect them, and you will pray that the earth delivers what you need. You pray to the saints, to the Virgin Mary, to anyone who might listen, but you know there's a limit to how much they can do. This life is a constant battle between human will and natural forces beyond your control. Each day you rise earlier, work harder, and sleep less. Your children help where they can, but they are too young to understand the weight of what it means. They see the sun, they see the rain, and they see the earth growing beneath their small hands, but they do not yet know the real price of survival. You start to see it in their faces. They are growing, stronger, taller, more capable, and yet there is something in their eyes that you've never seen before. The fatigue of survival, it's written on their faces, in the way they sit around the hearth at night, watching the fire, but not really seeing it. The hunger is there, in the way their stomachs growl even when there's food on the table. The winter and the work have left their mark. You see them growing up in front of your eyes, their hands becoming calloused, their bodies hardening in response to the endless labor. They will know this life, just as you have. They will inherit it, just as you inherited it. They will work these same fields, plant these same crops, struggle with the same endless uncertainty that you face every year. The cycle continues. By summer, the crops are either thriving or faltering. There's no middle ground. Every day feels like a test. Drought threatens the fields, and you watch the sky for any sign of rain. The land begins to crack under the heat, the soil turning to dry dust. You pray for rain, but your prayers feel unanswered, just like they always do when the weather takes a turn for the worse. Your children are growing quicker now, their small hands becoming better at handling tools and farming equipment. They are learning the trade, the skill of survival. They may not understand the weight of what they are doing, but you know they will learn soon enough. It's the nature of this life. You grow up quickly when you are born into it. There is no childhood here. Only work, only labor, only endurance. The summer months blur together. The days are long and exhausting. You wake early and work until the sun dips below the horizon. The heat is unbearable at times, and you can feel the sweat run down your back, stinging your eyes. But you push through, because what else is there to do? The sun rises, the sun sets, and your body aches more with every turn of the seasons. And then comes the harvest. It is everything. It is the moment of truth. You have planted, you have worked, and now you wait to see if the land will reward you. Will there be enough to feed your family through the winter? Will there be enough to keep your children's bellies full, your roof overhead, and your soul from breaking? You gather the grain with shaking hands. You know it's not enough. It can never be enough. But you gather it anyway, placing the golden sheaves in neat stacks, trying to convince yourself that there's a future in the work you've done. As the harvest is finished, you begin to feel the weight of the year lift slightly from your shoulders. The grain is stored, the animals are brought in for the winter, and the work is done. For a while there is nothing but rest, but it is never enough. It never lasts long. And so, the year ends as it always does, filled with the quiet tension of what comes next. The frost of autumn eventually gives way to the first whisper of winter, and with it, the quiet becomes deafening. Your days now bleed together in a haze of cold winds and long, dark hours. The fields are empty, the plows and sickles resting against the walls of your barn, their metal rusting in the damp air. The food stores you've gathered are more than enough to get you through the coming months. Barely, but they are no guarantee. You must ration each loaf of bread, each hunk of cheese, and even the last scraps of salted meat that you managed to save from the harvest. The work of the field has slowed, but winter brings its own demands. The livestock must be cared for. Their food needs to be carefully measured, their pens cleaned, their coats checked for pests. You spend what daylight hours you have fixing roofs and securing the doors, making sure that no snow or ice can get inside. You patch up any leaks, reinforce your hut's walls, and make certain that you are as prepared as possible for the months ahead. But the mental toll of winter begins to creep in. You're so used to the work, so used to the rush of the harvest or the planting, that when the days turn to darkness early and the work slows down, you are left with nothing but the cold and the silent. You stand at the edge of your plot of land, staring at the barren fields. The winter is quiet, but not peaceful. There is an ominous stillness to it. The world, in its frozen state, seems both fragile and deadly. The roads are inaccessible, and the village becomes a ghost of its former self. People stay inside, gathered in their small homes, waiting out the worst of the season. The winter wind howls at the door, testing your house's fortitude, making sure your family stays huddled and warm. You're not unaccustomed to hardship. You know how to survive. But the lack of sunlight and the stretch of days without any work to occupy you begins to wear on you. The cold seems to penetrate your bones in a way that nothing else does. Even as you live through the long, quiet nights, the sounds of life are never far away. The village may be silent, but the animals are alive with the sound of hooves in the snow. You listen for the cries of the wild, the occasional lowing of cattle, and the incessant barking of dogs that keep watch over the livestock. The life of a peasant never truly stops. It merely shifts its rhythm. It is on nights like these, when the fire burns low and the wind cuts sharp against the walls of your home, that you reflect on the cycle you live in. You think back to your youth, when you would dream of escaping this life, when you would imagine a life beyond the land. But now, with every year that passes, you realize something fundamental. You have become this land. Its seasons have become yours. Its pain, its struggles, its triumphs, these are now as much a part of you as your own blood. Your children, growing up in this harsh world, are starting to understand that too. They've learned the value of hard work, the relentless march of the seasons, the importance of each harvest and each small triumph. They understand that survival is not a given, that it is something you have to fight for each day. They are becoming more like you. There's no real celebration for the passing of winter. The calendar is just a marker for the harshness of the year, and the only real milestones are the arrival of spring and the start of another cycle. No one in the village waits eagerly for the arrival of the new year. The days blur together in an endless march, but there are quiet moments, even in the darkest nights. You look around at your children, their faces lit by the flickering firelight. You realize in those moments that this life, this simple, painful, beautiful life, is the only one you've ever known. It is the only one you have, and despite everything, despite the hunger and the cold, you would not want it any other way. You know what comes next. You've been through the winters before, and though they are brutal, they always come to an end. The frost will break, the snow will melt, and life will once again spring from the earth. You will plant your fields, tend your crops, care for your animals, and repeat the cycle. It will never be easy, but it is your life. And like every peasant who has ever lived before you, you will endure. You will live through the next winter, and the next, and the next. Because what else is there to do? By the time spring arrives, you are ready. The snow has retreated, the ground softens, and the first buds appear, delicate but unmistakable. The world is awakening. It always does, even after the hardest of winters. The first fresh shoots of grass, the bright green of newly budding trees. Nature always begins again. But you know better than to trust it all. You wait. You know the harvest will be hard. You know the work will not end. But you also know that as long as you are here, as long as you and your family are alive, you will keep pushing forward. You will keep planting. You will keep tending the earth, and you will keep living. Because that is all you know. The spring comes in fits and starts, as it always does. The earth is reluctant to let go of the cold, clinging to the remnants of winter's icy grip, but gradually the warmth begins to creep in. The ground softens, the first buds peek out, and slowly but surely, the rhythm of the seasons picks up again. As the earth begins to thaw, so does your work. The days grow longer, and you return to the fields, hoe in hand, ready to start anew. You dig deep into the soil, breaking through the thick clumps of earth, loosening it up for planting. The effort is backbreaking, and yet there's a sense of familiarity, a comfort in the hard physical labor. This is your life, the soil, the sweat, the relentless march of the seasons. You are bound to it, and it is bound to you. You plant the first of the season's crops with as much hope as you can muster, though you know better than to believe in the land's mercy. The sun may shine, but the rain may never come. The harvest may be bountiful, or it may be a failure. But you do what you've always done. You work, you plant, you pray, and you wait. The fields are not kind to you, but the work is always the same. You are always tied to it, tied to the land that gives you what it will, whether you deserve it or not. The rhythm of your labor begins again. The days pass in a blur of hard work and endless chores. There's no time for rest, no time for leisure. Every moment is spent in service to the land, to the animals, to the survival of your family. You wake at dawn and work until the last of the light fades. You feed the animals, repair the fences, tend the crops, mend the thatch on the roof, and still there is always more to do. It never stops. You look at your children now, older, stronger, their muscles taut from the work they've learned. They are becoming part of the land, part of the cycle that shapes you all. They are learning, just as you did, that survival is about endurance, about pushing through the toughest of times, and never giving up. Your eldest son now carries the same look of determination you wore in your youth. He is strong, capable, and soon he will be old enough to take on more responsibility, to shoulder the weight of the family and the land. You know that when you are too old to work the fields, he will be the one who rises before the sun, who labors under the harsh summer sun, who sacrifices his own well-being for the sake of those he loves. And yet, you also know that his life will be no easier than yours. The weight of the land, the seasons, and the lords who own everything will follow him, just as it followed you, but it will be his to carry now. And one day, he will pass it to his children, just as you have. As the summer rolls in, The crops begin to show their first signs of life. The barley, the oats, the wheat, everything begins to grow, albeit slowly. You tend to the fields, watching the plants carefully, praying for the right amount of rain, the right amount of sunlight. The work is never ending, but there is something comforting in the process. You see the progress, the tiny buds of grain appearing where there once was only bare earth. It is a small victory, a reminder that you can still make things grow, even in the face of all the adversity. But you know the danger is never far behind. There are signs in the sky, the clouds that roll in thick and fast, the change in the wind that hint at a storm coming. You brace yourself, knowing that it could be the difference between another failed harvest and a prosperous year. The rains come, not in soft, nourishing drops, but in torrential downpours that flood the fields, wash away the young plants, and leave you with nothing but mud. The earth swallows your labor, and the despair sets in again. You feel the weight of your work, the sweat of your brow, the hope that has risen inside you, only to be dashed by the weather. This is the way of it, always. You watch as the floodwaters rise, as the grains are drowned before they have a chance to grow. There is no crying for what's lost. There is no time. You gather the remnants of the crop and turn your focus to the next task, the next cycle. The land will continue, whether you can keep up with it or not. By autumn, the days feel heavier. You spend the months leading up to harvest in a state of constant apprehension, checking the weather, watching the skies, praying for the best. You gather what you can from the earth, knowing that you will need every last bit to survive the coming winter. Every kernel of grain is vital. Every potato pulled from the soil is one more meal that might save your family. But you know better. Even now, when the harvest is brought in and the grain is carefully stored away, there is always that fear, the anxiety that you won't have enough to make it through the cold months. The village shares what it can, but there's little enough for everyone. There is no surplus. No extra. What you grow is what you get. And if it's not enough, well, you'll make do. The winter looms again, but for now, you can rest, barely. The grain is stored. The firewood is stacked high. Your family is inside, gathered around the warmth of the hearth, and you can almost forget the outside world. The cold is biting, but you know that if you've made it this far, you can survive a little longer. You settle into your hut, your home, and for the first time in a long time, you allow yourself to rest. Your children sleep peacefully, their bellies full for once, and you know you've done your best. You've made it through the storm, through the cycles of hope and despair, and lived to see another year. This is your life. This is your survival. And no matter how hard it is, no matter how many challenges the earth throws at you, you will keep going, because there is nothing else. The cycle continues. And so, you continue.